create plasticity is to create mismatches or errors in how we perform things. And this, I think, is an amazing and important feature of neuroplasticity that is highly underappreciated. The way to create plasticity is to send signals to the brain that something is wrong, something is different, and something isn't being achieved. And I think this will completely reframe people that lack certain neurons that for proprioceptive feedback. They are very poor at controlling their motor behavior. They get injured a lot. It's actually a terrible situation. So we've got all these representations inside, and we have maps of our motor commands. We know that, for instance, if I want to reach out and grab the pen in front of me, that I need to generate a certain amount of force. So I rarely overshoot. I rarely miss the pen, okay? So our maps of the motor world and our maps of the sensory world are merged. The way to create plasticity is to create mismatches or errors in how we perform things. And this, I think, is an amazing and important feature of neuroplasticity that is highly underappreciated. The way to create plasticity is to send signals to the brain that something is wrong, something is different, and something isn't being achieved. And I think this will completely reframe the way that most people think about plasticity. Most of us think about plasticity as, okay, we're going to get into this optimal learning state or flow, and then suddenly we're going to be able to do all the things that we wish that we could do. Well, I hate to break it to you, but flow is an expression of what we already know how to do. It is not a state for learning. And I'm willing to go to bat with any of the flowanistas out there that want to challenge me on that one. Flow is an expression of nervous system capabilities that are already embedded in us. Errors and making errors out of sync with what we would like to do is how our nervous system is cued through very distinct biological mechanisms that something isn't going right, and therefore certain neurochemicals are deployed that signal the neural circuits that they have to change. So let's talk about the experiments that support what I just said, because I'm about to tell you that making errors over and over and over again is the route to shaping your nervous system so that it performs better and better and better. And I'm not going to tell you that the last rep of a set where you hit failure in the gym is anything like neuroplasticity. You hear that too, that, it's pushing to that point of a cliff where you just can't function anymore. That's the signal. That's not the signal. That's a distinct neuromuscular phenomenon that bears zero resemblance to what it takes to get neuroplasticity. So let's talk about errors and making errors and why and how that triggers the release of chemicals that then allow us to not just learn the thing that we're doing in the motor sense, play the piano, dance, etc., but it also creates an environment, a milieu within the brain that allows us to then go learn how to couple or uncouple a particular emotion to an experience, or better language learning, or better mathematical learning. It's a really fundamental aspect of how we're built, and when you look at it, it's actually very straightforward. It's a series of logical steps that once you learn for plasticity. Is it just having prism glasses on? No, because they did that experiment and ruled that out. Is it just the fact that the visual thing is appears to be far over to my right when in fact it's right in front of me? No. The signal that generates the plasticity is the making of errors. It's the reaches and failures that signal to the nervous system that this is not working, and therefore the shifts start to take place. And this is so fundamentally important because I think most people think, oh, well, practice is going to be, I have to access beginner's mind, which is a great concept, actually. It's about approaching things expecting to make errors, which is great. I think I am a believer in beginner's mind. But people understandably get frustrated, like they're trying to learn a piece on the piano and they don't know, they can't do it, or they're trying to write a piece of code, or they're trying to access some sort of motor behavior and they can't do it. And the frustration drives them crazy and like, I can't do it, when they don't realize that the errors themselves are signaling to the brain and nervous system, something's not working. And of course, the brain doesn't understand the words, something isn't working. The brain doesn't even understand frustration as an emotional state. The brain understands the neurochemicals that are released, namely epinephrine and acetylcholine, but also, and we'll get into this, the molecule dopamine, when we start to approximate the correct behavior just a little bit, and we start getting it a little bit right. So what happens is when we make errors, The nervous system kind of, I don't want to say freaks out because it's a very mechanistic and controlled situation, but the nervous system starts releasing neurotransmitters and neuromodulators that say, we better change something in the circuitry. And so errors are the basis for neuroplasticity and for learning. And I wish that this was more prominent out there. I guess this is why I'm saying it. And humans do not like this feeling of frustration and making errors. The few that do exceedingly well in whatever pursuits they happen to be involved in. The ones that don't generally don't do well. They generally don't learn much. And if you think about it, why would your nervous system ever change? Why would it ever change? Unless there was something to be afraid of, something that made us feel awful will signal that the nervous system needs to change, or there's an error in our performance. So it turns out that the feedback of these errors, the reaching to the wrong location, starts to release a number of things, and now you've heard about them many times, but this would be epinephrine. It increases alertness, acetylcholine, focus, and this is why frustration that leads us to just kind of quit and walk away from the endeavor is the absolute worst thing. But because if acetylcholine is released, it creates an opportunity to focus on the error margin, the distance between what it is that you're doing and what it is that you would like to do. And then the nervous system starts to make changes almost immediately in order to try and get the behavior right. And when you start getting it even a little bit right, that third molecule comes online or is released, which is dopamine, which allows for the plastic changes to occur very fast. Now, this is what all happens very naturally in young brains, but in old brains, it tends to be pretty slow, except for in two conditions. So let's say it's for learning an instrument as an adult. Probably anywhere from 7 minutes to 30 minutes is going to, provided that it's you're fully attending, you're very focused, is going to be a pretty significant stimulus to inspire plasticity in the nervous system. Now, there is one way to get a lot of plasticity all at once as an adult. There is that kind of holy grail thing of getting massive plasticity as you would when you were a young person, but as an adult. And the Huberman Lab revealed this by setting a very serious contingency on the learning. What they did was they had a situation where subjects had to find food that was displaced in their visual world, again, by putting prisms, and they had to find the food, and the food made a noise. There was a noise set kind of the location of the food through an array of speakers. Basically, what they found was that if people have to adjust their visual world in order to get food, the plasticity would eventually occur, but it was very slow as an adult. It was very, very slow. Unless they actually had to hunt that food. They actually, in order to eat at all, they needed plasticity. And then what happened was remarkable. What they observed is that the plasticity as an adult can be as dramatic, as robust as it is in a young person or in a young animal subject, provided that there's a serious incentive for the plasticity to occur. And this is absolutely important to understand, which is that how badly we need or want the plasticity determines how fast that plasticity will arrive, which is incredible because the brain is just neurons and soup of chemicals. But this means that the importance of something, how important something is to us, actually gates the rate of plasticity and the magnitude of plasticity. And this is why just passively going through most things, going through the motions, as we say, or just getting our reps in, quote unquote, is not sufficient to get the nervous system to change. This study, a beautiful study published in the Journal of Neuroscience, shows that if we actually have to accomplish something in order to eat or in order to get our ration of income, we will reshape our nervous system very, very quickly. So the nervous system has a capacity, to change at a tremendous rate to an enormous degree at any stage of life, provided it's important enough that happen. And I think some of you might be saying, well, duh, that's obvious. If it's really crucial, then of course it's going to change faster. But it didn't have to be that way. And for most people who are trying to learn how to learn faster or learn better, they probably, in most cases, they are hitting a limit because the need to change the vestibular system. And this may come as a surprise to some people, but probably not as a surprise to some of you whose professions or whose recreation involves a lot of motor activity and sort of what we call high dimensional skill activity, not just running or cycling or very linear activities like weightlifting, but things that involve inversions and a lot of lateral movement, actual sports, jumping, diving, rolling, these kinds of things, gymnastics type stuff. Why the vestibular system to access neuroplasticity? Well, we have a hardwired system for balance. And here's how it works in as simple terms as I can possibly come up with. As we move through space, or even if we're stationary, there are really three main planes of movement. Now, I realize some people are just listening to this, so I'm going to do this for both the folks that are just listening and for those of you that are watching on video. So there are three main modes of movement, and it turns out that your brain doesn't really know where your body is except when through that proprioceptive feedback. The main way it knows is through three planes of movement that we call pitch, which is like nodding. So if I nod like this, that's pitch. Then there's yaw, which is side to side, which is like shaking my head no. And then there's roll from side to side, like when a puppy looks at you like that kind of thing. Okay? So pitch, yaw, and roll. And the pilots out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. The brain knows the orientation and position of your body relative to gravity, depending on whether or not your brain is and your head actually is engaging more in pitch, yaw, or roll, or some combination. Because if I lean down like so, or like so, it's a combination of pitch, yaw, and roll. Now, you might say, like, what is going on here? Well, we have these little things in our inner ear called the semicircular canals. Just like our eyes have two main functions. One is to see objects in space, and the other is to set our circadian clocks through subconscious mechanisms. Our ears have two main roles. One is to hear, right, to perceive sound waves or take in sound waves for perception, so-called hearing. And the other is balance or vestibular function. So sitting in our ears are these semicircular canals, and they're these little tubes where these little stones, they're actually little bits of calcium, roll back and forth like little marbles. When we roll this way, they roll this way. When we pitch, when we go from side to side, there's some that sit flat like this, and they go like marbles inside of a hula hoop. And then we have roll. There's some that are kind of at 45 degrees to those, and it's kind of pitch, yaw, and roll. So, okay, great. That sends signals to the rest of our brain and body that tell us how to compensate for shifts relative to gravity. I say, okay, wait, I thought we were talking about plasticity, but this is where it gets really, really cool. Errors in vestibular motor sensory experience, meaning when we are off balance and we have to compensate by looking at, thinking about, or responding to the world differently, cause an area of our brain called the cerebellum. It actually means mini brain. It looks like a little mini brain like tucked below our cortex in the back. Cause the cerebellum to signal some of these deeper brain centers that release dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. And that's because these circuits in the inner ear, etc., and the cerebellum, they were designed to recalibrate our motor movements when our relationship to gravity changes, something fundamental to survival. We can't afford to be falling down all the time or missing things that we grab for or running in the wrong direction when something is pursuing us. These are hardwired circuits that tap right into these chemical pathways. And those chemical pathways are the gates to plasticity. So I really want to spell this out clearly because I've given a lot of information today. The first thing is, how are you arriving to the learning bout? You need to make sure your level of autonomic arousal is correct. The ideal